At the family reunion, I heard my son whisper, "Let's toast to Mom's last Christmas." I wasn't even sick. I stayed quiet and smiled. The next morning, I changed my will, and when the lawyer read it out loud, my daughter-in-law fainted while my son screamed. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The kitchen was a chaos of warmth and noise. My granddaughter's laughter pealed from the living room, competing with the football game on the television. The air was thick with the scent of pine, roasting ham, and the gingerbread cookies I had spent the morning frosting. My hands were busy, automatic. I wiped a spill of eggnog from the counter, collected empty glasses that had gathered like fallen leaves around the sink. It was my rhythm, my expected role in the symphony of our family Christmas Eve. For decades, I had been the conductor of this event, but somewhere along the line, I had become part of the scenery, reliable, essential, and invisible. "Mom, do we have more of the whipped cream?" Chloe called from the dining room, her voice a bright chirp over the din. "In the fridge, dear," I said, not turning around. I heard the refrigerator door open and close. "Ellie, this glaze is perfect," my sister-in-law Carol said, patting my shoulder as she passed with a tray of rolls. I smiled the smile that was my uniform. It was a real smile, born of habit and genuine love for these people, but it was also a tool. It kept the peace. It asked for nothing. The request for napkins came next. Marcus, my son, waved an empty holder. "We're running low here, Mom." I nodded and moved toward the walk-in pantry. It was a small, cool space, lined with shelves of canned goods, extra paper products, and the memories of meals past. I reached for a fresh package of the linen-like napkins Chloe had insisted on buying. As my fingers closed around the cardboard, I heard their voices, low and intimate, just on the other side of the partially open door. It was Marcus. "Just keep it down. We don't need a scene tonight." Chloe's answering whisper was a giggle, conspiratorial. "I'm just excited. It's a big step. Once we know what we're working with, we can finally get the plans drawn. The architect said spring is the best time to break ground." A heavy, cold silence expanded in my chest. I did not move. "I know," Marcus said, his voice a blend of weariness and anticipation. "Let's just get through tonight. Tomorrow we can start the real planning." He paused, and I could picture him, my successful, handsome son, glancing toward the kitchen to ensure the coast was clear. "We'll toast to it later, to Mom's last Christmas." Chloe's soft, agreeing laugh was the sound of a lock clicking shut. "To her last Christmas. It's bittersweet, but it's time." My hand froze on the napkin box. The texture of the cardboard became sharp under my fingertips. The blood in my ears roared, drowning out the distant football commentary, the laughter, the clatter of dishes. Last Christmas. The words did not feel real. They were abstract, belonging to someone else. I was 58. I had my annual physical 2 months prior. Dr. Evans had called me remarkably healthy. I tended my small garden. I walked 3 miles each morning. Last Christmas. I stood in the dark pantry, a statue amidst the flour and sugar. The pain arrived not as a sharp stab, but as a profound, hollowing cold. It started in my stomach and spread outward, leaching the warmth from my limbs. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a verdict. They had tried me, convicted me of being obsolete, and passed sentence, all in a cheerful whisper over my own Christmas ham. The next breath I took was deliberate. I counted to 5. I let the coldness settle, harden into something clear and solid. I pulled the napkin package from the shelf and stepped out of the pantry. The kitchen light was bright. Carol was laughing at something. My husband's old jazz records played in the background. The world had not ended. It had simply shifted on its axis. I walked to the dining room, my steps even. I placed the napkins in the center of the table, arranging them neatly. "Everything all right, Mom?" Marcus asked. He was pouring wine, his back to me. "Perfect," I said. My voice was my own, steady and warm. "Just couldn't find them for a second." He turned and his eyes met mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker, a shadow of guilt, or perhaps just discomfort at the secrecy. He looked away first, focusing on filling Chloe's glass. "Okay, everyone," Chloe chimed, raising her own glass. "A toast before we eat." The family gathered, their faces flushed and happy. My grandson, his mouth smeared with chocolate. My niece, home from college. Carol and her husband. Marcus and Chloe standing close together, a unit. They all looked at me, expecting me to raise my glass, to smile, to be the grateful center of their affection. Marcus cleared his throat. To family, he said, his voice loud and hearty. To being together, and to Mom for another amazing Christmas. There it was. The unspoken second half of the sentence hung in the air between us. Another amazing Christmas, for now. Every eye was on me. I felt the weight of the crystal in my hand. I looked at Marcus, and I held his gaze. I saw the man he was, the boy I had read to at night, the teenager I had driven to endless soccer games, the man I had helped buy his first house. I also saw the stranger who had just planned my expiration date with his wife. My smile did not waver. I had spent a lifetime perfecting it. "Thank you, darling," I said. My voice was calm honey. "To family." I took a sip of the wine. It was dry and expensive, a bottle Chloe had brought. It tasted like nothing. As the chatter resumed and they began passing plates, I sat down at the head of the table. I watched them. I listened to their plans for the next day, for the summer vacation they were booking, for the new car Marcus was considering. Their futures stretched out before them, bright and infinite. In their version, mine was a short, tidy road leading to a well-organized end, conveniently timed for their new beginning. I ate my food. I praised the cooking. I asked my granddaughter about school. I performed the role of a leaner Vance matriarch with flawless precision. But inside, the cold clarity had taken root. This was not hurt. Hurt was a messy, hot thing. This was something else. It was the quiet, final click of a door closing. As I watched my son laugh, oblivious, I understood. This was indeed a last Christmas, but not mine. It was the last Christmas of their old world. The last Christmas where they could assume. The last Christmas where I would listen from the shadows. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of noise and cleanup. I washed dishes, my hands moving in warm, soapy water. Chloe hugged me goodbye, her perfume a cloud of jasmine and entitlement. "We'll call you tomorrow, Ellie," she said. "Rest up." When the last car tail light disappeared down the drive, the silence of the house was absolute. I stood in the doorway, the cold night air biting my cheeks. I did not feel tired. I felt awake in a way I had not for years. I locked the door and walked through the ravaged living room. I stopped before the large portrait on the wall, a family photo from 10 years ago, all of us smiling, my husband still alive beside me. I spoke to the empty room, my voice firm in the quiet. "No," I said. It was not a cry of anger. It was a statement of fact. It was the first word of a new sentence. I turned off the lights and went upstairs. Sleep would not come, but for the first time in a long time, I did not mind waiting for the dawn. The morning sun cut through the haze of my sleepless night, laying bright stripes across the living room carpet. It illuminated the aftermath. Empty glasses stood sentinel on every surface. Crumpled napkins, half-eaten gingerbread men, a stray ribbon from a present. The house smelled of stale wine and pine needles. I stood in the center of it, still in my robe, and saw it all with a new, harsh clarity. This was not my home. It was a stage where I played a part, and last night the directors had informed me, casually, that the final act was being written. My hands began the work automatically. I collected the glasses, ran hot water in the sink. The clinking of crystal was the only sound. I wiped down counters, my movements methodical, a familiar ritual that now felt like an archaeological dig through the evidence of my own presumed demise. Each discarded plate, each forgotten ornament, was a relic of a life they considered finished. By 10 o'clock, the house was orderly again, but the silence was different. It was no longer peaceful, it was expectant. I made a pot of tea, the herbal kind I favored, and carried it to the small table by the bay window. I sat and watched the empty driveway. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Marcus. "Thanks for everything last night, Mom. You outdid yourself. Chat soon." I stared at the words, "chat soon." The phrase was a placeholder for the conversation about my will, my health, my asterisk plans. I did not reply. I took a sip of tea and looked at the family photos arranged on the bookshelf across the room. There was Marcus in his cap and gown. Our family at the beach, years ago, my husband's arm around me. A formal portrait from my 50th birthday. In every one I was smiling. The reliable center. The assumption in every frame was that I would always be there to hold the center together, until, conveniently, I would not. The cold resolution that had formed in the pantry hardened into a plan. It was not a plan of confrontation. That would be messy, emotional, and on their terms. My plan required a different kind of strength. It required silence and precision. I picked up the phone and scrolled past Marcus's name. I found the contact labeled *Beverly*. My friend, my book club confidant for 20 years, the one person who never saw me as just Marcus's mother. She answered on the second ring. "Ellie, I was just thinking about you. How was the grand reunion?" Her voice was warm, laced with its usual sharp humor. For a moment, I could not speak. The simple concern undid something in my throat. "Beverly," I said, and my voice was steady, which surprised me. A pause, she heard it, the lack of warmth, the flatness. "What's wrong?" Her tone shifted immediately, all business. "I need to tell you something, and I need you not to interrupt until I'm finished." "All right." I heard the rustle as she likely moved to a quieter space. I told her. I did not cry. I recited the facts as I had heard them, my voice detached, as if reporting an incident that had happened to someone else. The pantry, the whisper, the toast. Mom's last Christmas. The architect, spring. I left nothing out. The silence on the other end was profound. Then a single, succinct word. "Animals." It was not shouted. It was a cold, disgusted verdict. "They think I'm dying, Beverly. Or that I should be. They are measuring the curtains." "Have you said anything to Marcus?" "No." "Good," she said, quick and firm. "Do not give them warning. What are you going to do about it?" That was the question, the one that had been circling in the silent house all morning. It was not a question of if, but how. "I am going to see a lawyer," I said. "Today, if I can get an appointment." "What kind of lawyer?" "An estate lawyer. I am going to rewrite my will." A low, appreciative hum came through the line. "I see. Redirecting the traffic." "Something like that. They have planned for an ending. I am going to give them a different one." "Ellie Vance," she said, and I could hear the fierce grin in her voice. "It's about time. What can I do?" Her immediate alliance, devoid of pity and full of actionable support, was the first real warmth I had felt since the pantry. "Right now, just this. Listen. Later, I may need a witness, or just a friend who doesn't think I've lost my mind." "You have me, for all of it. Do you have a lawyer?" "I do not. I need someone discreet, someone who will not talk to my son's friends at the country club." "Let me make a call," Beverly said. "My cousin used a woman downtown, a Debio, for a complicated trust. She's supposed to be a pit bull in a suit. Smart. No nonsense. I'll text you the number." "Thank you, Beverly." "Don't thank me. This is the most exciting thing you've done since you retired. Now go take a shower, put on your best, business suit, and call that lawyer. I want a full report tonight." We hung up. I placed the phone on the table. The sun had moved, now illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air above the clean carpet. I did not see dust. I saw time, finite and precious, that I had been wasting in the role they had assigned me. I went upstairs. I did not look at the family photos in the hallway. I entered my bedroom and opened the closet. At the back, hung in a garment bag, was a suit I had not worn in years, a tailored steel gray pantsuit I'd bought for a library fundraising gala. I took it out. I showered, the hot water a shock to my system. I dressed with care. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman who looked back had sharp eyes and silver hair swept back. She looked capable. She looked like a person who handled her own affairs. My phone chimed. A text from Beverly with a name, Ms. Adebio *, a number, and an address downtown. The message read, "Appointment confirmed for 2:30 p.m. She's expecting you." It was 12:17. I had 2 hours. I made another cup of tea and sat at my small desk. I opened a blank notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote in my clear librarian's script, "What is mine?" I started a list. Not of assets, not yet. That would come. I started with the things they had already in their minds distributed. My mother's quilts, stored in the cedar chest. My father's old fountain pen. The first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird my husband had given me when Marcus was born. The set of china that came from my grandmother, used only on holidays like the one last night. Each item I wrote down was an anchor, pulling me back into my own history, a history that existed long before I was Mom, and would exist after that title was stripped of its power. I closed the notebook at 1:30. I put on my coat, collected my purse and keys. As I locked the front door, I glanced back into the quiet, sunlit house. It looked the same as it always had, but I was different. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was no longer in charge. It had been replaced by a cold, clean line of purpose. I was not going to their planned ending. I was going downtown to write my own. The downtown offices were in a building of glass and steel, a world away from my quiet suburb. The lobby was a cavern of polished stone and muted light. I gave my name to the uniformed security guard, who directed me to the 18th floor. The elevator was silent, my reflection a stark portrait in the brushed metal doors. The woman in the gray suit looked back, her expression unreadable. She looked like someone who belonged here. The doors opened onto a carpeted hallway. The law firm of Adebbio and Associates had a discreet brass plaque. I pushed through the heavy door. The reception area was quiet, furnished in deep blues and warm wood. A young woman with a professional smile looked up from her computer. "Mrs. Vance, Ms. Adebbio is expecting you. Please follow me." I was led down a short hall. The assistant knocked once on a door and opened it. "Eleanor Vance, ma'am." The office was spacious, with a wall of windows offering a panoramic view of the city. It was orderly. 2 neat stacks of files on a large desk, a single family photo in a simple frame, shelves of legal books with precise, colored bindings. The woman who rose from behind the desk was in her 40s, dressed in a navy suit as sharp as her gaze. Her hair was cut in a close-cropped, natural style. She did not smile, but her nod was respectful. "Mrs. Vance, I'm near Adebbio. Please have a seat." Her voice was calm, clear, devoid of unnecessary warmth. I appreciated that immediately. I sat in the leather chair facing the desk. She resumed her seat, lacing her fingers together on the blotter. "My secretary said you have a matter concerning your estate. How can I help you?" I had rehearsed this in my mind during the drive. I would be factual. I would not cry. This was not a therapy session, it was a strategic consultation. "I need to revoke my current will and create a new one," I began. "The circumstances that informed my previous decisions have changed." She picked up a pen. "I see, and what precipitated this change?" I looked out the window for a moment, at the gray December sky over the cityscape. Then I looked back at her. "Yesterday, during a family Christmas Eve gathering, I overheard my son and his wife discussing their plans for after my death. They referred to it as Mom's last Christmas. They were excited to begin architectural planning for renovations to my home in the spring." I delivered the information flatly, as if reading a news report. Ms. Adebbio's pen paused. Her dark eyes studied me. She was assessing, not for emotional truth, but for legal intent and stability. "I understand," she said, her tone neutral. "That is a significant shift in context. You are, if I may ask, in good health." "I am. My doctor confirmed it 2 months ago. Their assumption is premature and entirely their own." A slight, almost imperceptible nod. "So, this is not about a terminal diagnosis. It is about a breach of trust and expectations." "Yes," I said. The word was solid. "They have made plans based on an assumption of my passivity and my imminent absence. I wish to correct that assumption." Legally, I confirmed. She opened a fresh legal pad. "Tell me about your current will, in broad terms." "My husband passed away 7 years ago. The estate passed to me. My previous will leaves the house, the majority of my investments, and personal effects to my son, Marcus Vance. There are smaller bequests to other relatives, charities." "And now you wish to disinherit him." I considered the word. "Not entirely. I wish to redirect the legacy. The house is not just an asset. It was my home with my husband for 35 years. It contains my history. I do not want it gutted and turned into a modern showplace for my daughter-in-law's social aspirations." I heard the steel enter my own voice. I did not temper it. My financial assets were built from my salary as a librarian and my husband's prudent investments. They were meant to provide security, not seed money for a speculative vacation property. Ms. Adebio wrote swiftly, "What are your new intentions?" I took a folder from my purse. Inside was the notebook page I had started that morning. "I have a list. I want the house, upon my death, to be donated to the local historical society. It is a classic example of post-war architecture in this suburb. They have a preservation program. It should be preserved, not demolished." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she wrote it down. "That is specific. Go on." "The bulk of my liquid assets, savings, investments, I want to establish a fund. I've been looking into the community center on Elm Street. They run literacy programs. I want to create an endowment, the Alina Vance Legacy Fund, to support their work in perpetuity." She looked up at me then, a flicker of something beyond professional interest in her eyes. Respect, perhaps. "That is a substantial legacy." "It is a meaningful one," I corrected softly. "And your son?" "I will leave him my personal library, the books. He never had much interest in them, but they have value. Sentimental and some monetary. Also a sum of money, enough to be a gesture, not a life-changing windfall. $50,000. She noted it, and the daughter-in-law, Chloe. I had thought about this. There is a brooch, an Art Deco piece with sapphires and diamonds. It was my mother's. It is valuable. I will leave that to Chloe, specifically. I met the lawyer's gaze. The wording is important. I want it to say, "To my daughter-in-law, Chloe Vance, I leave my sapphire brooch in the hope it reminds her that some things of value are earned, not assumed." For the first time, Ms. Adebio's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. "That is precise language. We can include it as a wish, though the sentiment may not be legally enforceable." "I understand. I want it written down nonetheless." We spent the next hour going through details. Account numbers, deeds, the formal name of the community center. She was thorough, methodical. She asked clear questions. She did not ask if I was sure or if I wanted to reconsider for the sake of family harmony. She treated my decisions as the rational choices of a competent adult. It was the first time in years I had felt seen that way. "I will have my assistant draft the documents," she said finally, closing her portfolio. "We will need 2 witnesses who are not beneficiaries. Do you have someone?" "My friend, Beverly." "Good. Once you review and sign, the old will is revoked. This becomes your last testament. I would also recommend you execute a durable power of attorney and healthcare directive, nomming someone other than your son, given the climate." "Beverly," I said again without hesitation. "Very well. I will include those documents. We can schedule the signing for later this week." I stood. She stood as well, coming around the desk to shake my hand. Her grip was firm. "Mrs. Vance," she said, holding my eyes for a moment longer. "This is a powerful thing you are doing, taking back the narrative." I nodded. That was exactly it. "Thank you for your professionalism, Ms. Adebio." "I'll be in touch." I walked out of the office, back through the quiet reception into the elevator. The descent felt like a release of pressure. It was done. The mechanism was in motion. In a few days, I would sign my name on a document that would formalize my defiance. It was not a scream. It was a signature. Quiet, legal, and absolute. The cold air outside was a shock. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to my car. I did not feel triumphant. I felt focused. The hurt was still there, a cold stone in my gut, but it was now surrounded by the reinforced concrete of a plan. I started the engine. I did not drive home immediately. I sat for a moment, watching the people rush by on the sidewalk, all wrapped up in their own lives, their own assumptions. I had just hired a lawyer to dismantle mine. I put the car in gear and merged into the traffic, moving forward with the flow. The house was too quiet when I returned. The silence after the lawyer's office felt different, no longer expectant, but charged, like the air before a storm. I hung my coat in the closet, my fingers brushing against the familiar wool of my husband's old overcoat, still hanging there after all these years. I did not pause. I had legal documents in motion. Now I needed a personal inventory. I went to my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Beneath neatly folded sweaters was a locked wooden box. I retrieved the small key from my jewelry case. Inside the box were folders, tax returns, property deeds, investment statements, the paper trail of a prudent life. I carried them to the dining table and began to sort. This was the financial map of a leaner Vance. I made a list on a fresh legal pad, noting account numbers, balances, and institutions. The numbers were not enormous, but they were substantial. A lifetime of dual incomes, careful saving, and modest living. I calculated the total. It was more than enough for the community center fund. Seeing it written down in my own hand made it real. This was not their future capital. It was my legacy to redirect. But the money was only part of it. The deeper work came next. I stood and walked to the hallway, to the large cedar chest that had belonged to my mother. I lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and lavender bloomed into the air. Inside, folded with tissue paper, were the quilts. Not decorative items from a store, but stories stitched in fabric. The double wedding ring pattern she made for my marriage. The log cabin quilt I had slept under as a child, its fabrics faded to soft pastels. I ran my hand over the intricate stitching. My mother's hands had done this. In my mind, they had already been given away, draped over the back of Chloe's modern sofa as a rustic accent piece. I closed the lid. They were not communal property. They were mine. In the living room, I stood before the bookshelves. My personal library, first editions mixed with well-loved paperbacks, organized not by value but by the affection I held for them. My copy of Asterisk, Their Eyes Were Watching God Asterisk, its spine cracked from multiple readings. The complete works of Langston Hughes, a gift from my husband when we were dating. I pulled out the To Kill a Mockingbird asterisk. I opened the front cover. In his firm script he had written, "For my Ellie who teaches me every day what real courage looks like, on the occasion of our son's birth." A thin, sharp pain pierced my calm. He would have been disgusted by Marcus's behavior. I placed the book back on the shelf. These were my companions. I was leaving them to Marcus, who would likely sell them to a collector. That was his choice. But the choice to give them was now mine, not his assumption. I moved to the small sunroom I used as a painting studio. Canvases were stacked against the wall, most facing inward. Landscapes from trips taken long ago. A portrait of my husband, unfinished. Abstracts from a period of grief after he died, swirls of gray and blue. I had not painted in over a year. Chloe had once called this room wasted space and suggested it would make a perfect home office for Marcus. I turned the canvases around, looking at each one. They were not masterpieces, but they were pieces of me. Evidence of a life lived in observation and feeling, not just in service. The final stop was my jewelry box on the dresser. I opened it. The sapphire brooch lay in a velvet tray, its Art Deco lines sharp and cool. It had been my mother's only piece of fine jewelry bought by my father during their first year of marriage. She wore it on Sundays. I wore it at my wedding. It was not just an ornament. It was a testament to a love that worked, that sacrificed, that earned its treasures. Chloe had admired it often, her gaze lingering with a covetousness she mistook for appreciation. She saw its market value. She never asked about its history. Leaving it to her with that specific clause was not just a gesture. It was the delivery of a truth she had refused to see. By early evening, I had filled several pages of the legal pad. The lists were comprehensive: financial assets, tangible property, sentimental items. The act of writing them down was an act of reclamation. Each item I named was a thread I pulled back into my own hands. My phone rang. It was Beverly. "I've been waiting all afternoon. Report," she said without preamble. "It's done. The documents are being drafted. I signed a retainer. I provided instructions." "Good, and I've spent the day taking an inventory of everything." A pause. "How does it feel?" I looked around the dining room, at the lists, the open boxes, the quilt now draped over a chair. "It feels like I am unpacking my own life after a long trip. I am remembering who I was before I was just the source of things for other people." "That's the first step," Beverly said, her voice firm. "Remembering. The next step is deciding what to do with it all while you're still very much alive." She was right. The will was a postscript. I needed a new chapter, not just a revised ending. "What are you doing tomorrow?" she asked. I don't know. Meet me for lunch, not at your house. In the city, we'll go to that little French place you like. My treat. We'll talk about the living part. All right, I agreed. The idea of leaving this house, of sitting in a restaurant as a leaner, not as mom or grandma or the hostess, held appeal. After we hung up, I gathered all the papers. I placed the financial documents back in their box. I folded the quilt and returned it to the chest. But I left the legal pad open on the table, the lists exposed. I needed to see them. They were not a secret to be hidden. They were a declaration, even if only to myself. I made a simple dinner. As I ate alone at the table, my eyes kept drifting to the list titled Sentimental, not for disposal asterisk. It was the longest list. It contained the proof that my life was not an empty vessel waiting to be filled with their plans. It was already full. The cold, calculating part of my mind noted that every item on that list was a point of evidence in my case against their assumptions. The emotional part, the part that still ached, simply saw them as friends I had neglected. I finished my meal. I washed the single plate. The house was still quiet, but the silence no longer felt like waiting. It felt like mine. The lunch with Beverly was at a small bistro with checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and bread. It was a place we had gone to for years, a neutral territory untouched by family associations. Beverly studied me over her menu. You look different, she announced. I am different, I said, not opening my menu. I already knew I would have the soup. Good, the shell-shocked look is gone. Now you look like you have a plan, a real one beyond the legalities. The waiter came. We ordered. Once he left, Beverly leaned forward. So, the will is drafted. The inventory is done. What is Alina Vance going to do with the rest of her Tuesday, and her Wednesday, and the years she has clearly decided she intends to have? I had thought of little else since our call. I made a list of what I own, but you're right, that's about death. I need to think about life. Exactly. They've shoved you into a corner labeled the past. You need to walk out of that corner and build something in the present, something they can't touch. I stirred my water with the straw. The community center, the one I named in the will, I've only driven past it. I've never been inside. Beverly's eyes lit up. So go, today. Don't just write them a check from the grave. See what they do. See if you want to be a part of it while you're breathing. It was a logical next step. The will created a future legacy. This could create a present purpose. I will, I said. The decision felt solid. After lunch, I drove across town to the Elm Street neighborhood. The community center was a converted brick schoolhouse, older but well kept. The playground beside it was full of children despite the December chill. As I walked from the parking lot, the noise reached me first. Not the muted, tasteful noise of a family party, but a vibrant cacophony of shouts, laughter, and the thump of a basketball from an open gym door. I pushed through the main entrance into a warm, bright lobby. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, covered in children's drawings taped up haphazardly. A handmade sign read, "Welcome," in multicolored letters. A harried-looking young man at a front desk looked up. Can I help you? I'd like to speak to the director if possible, I said. Sarah's in her office, down the hall, last door on the left, he pointed. I walked past an open classroom where a group of adults were bent over tablets, a tutor speaking slowly. A literacy class. Next door, a room with easels was splattered with paint. The energy was chaotic but purposeful. The director's door was open. A woman in her late 40s with a long braid was on the phone, but she waved me in with a smile, holding up a finger. I understand, Mrs. Jenkins. Yes, we can absolutely arrange a later pickup time for Malik on Tuesdays. No, it's no trouble at all. You have a good day now. She hung up and stood, extending her hand. Sarah Wilkins, sorry about that. How can I help you? Alina Vance, I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm, her attention fully on me despite the obvious demands of the place. I'm considering making a donation, but I wanted to see the center for myself first. Her smile became more professional but still warm. Of course. Let me give you a quick tour unless you prefer to just talk numbers. A tour, please. For the next 20 minutes, she showed me around. the computer lab with its outdated but functional machines, the after-school homework help room where volunteers were already setting out snacks, the small library, its shelves a mix of donated books and well-worn classics. She explained their programs: GED preparation, senior meals, after-school care, adult literacy, a small job training workshop. "We run on grants, donations, and a lot of volunteer sweat," she said as we returned to her office. "Every dollar stretches about a mile." I sat in the chair she offered. I am a retired librarian. The literacy component interests me particularly. Her face brightened. "We are always desperate for literacy tutors. The commitment can be as little as 2 hours a week. The need, however, is enormous." I looked past her, through the window of her office, which looked out onto the playground. A little girl in a bright pink coat was being pushed on a swing by an older boy, her laugh visible in the puffs of cold air. It was a scene of uncomplicated joy. It had nothing to do with inheritances or architectural plans. "I think I would like to volunteer," I heard myself say. The words were not planned, but they felt correct. "That would be wonderful," Sarah said, pulling a form from a drawer. "We do a background check, of course, then we can do a short training. When would you like to start?" "After the new year," I said. It was only a week away. A clean start. "Perfect." She handed me the form and a pamphlet. As I took them, I knew this was more than a diversion. This was the positive counterpart to the legal severance I was enacting. I was not just taking something away from Marcus and Chloe. I was giving something of myself elsewhere, to people who would not see me as a stepping stone. "About the donation," I said, folding the form and placing it in my purse. "It will be more substantial. I am arranging my estate. I intend to leave a significant portion to the center to establish a permanent fund for the literacy programs." Sarah's professional composure slipped for a second. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mrs. Vance, that's incredibly generous. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I have seen what you do here. It matters. I want it to continue." I stood. "I will be in touch after the holidays to complete the volunteer paperwork. My lawyer will contact you regarding the longer-term plans." She stood as well, a new depth of respect in her expression. "Thank you, truly, not just for the future gift, but for wanting to be part of the work now." I drove home as the early winter dusk settled. The house was dark and silent when I entered. I turned on the lights. It felt emptier than usual, but not in a sad way. It felt like a place I was preparing to leave, not by dying, but by living more fully elsewhere. I hung my coat next to my husband's. I looked at the quiet living room, the tidy shelves. Then I thought of the yellow lobby, the noisy classrooms, the children's drawings. The contrast was absolute. I went to my desk. I filled out the volunteer form. Under skills, I wrote asterisk librarian, patient, organized. Under reason for interest, I wrote asterisk to be useful asterisk. I sealed it in an envelope to mail tomorrow. This action, small and administrative, felt more powerful than signing the will would. The will was about death. This was about life, my life. I made a cup of tea and sat in the darkening living room. The plan was no longer just an act of reclamation or revenge. It had gained a positive dimension. I was building a new foundation, brick by brick, with a signature on a volunteer form, a future bequest, and the simple decision to show up. The cold stone of hurt was still there, but around it now was the steady, warming hum of purpose. 2 days after my visit to the community center, the envelope with the volunteer application was in the mail. My appointment to sign the new will was scheduled for the day after Christmas. A quiet rhythm had settled over my days, a rhythm of preparation and private purpose. I was in the living room, the afternoon sun weak through the windows, working on a knitting project, a simple scarf in deep blue wool. The repetitive motion was calming, a physical meditation. My mind was not on the stitches, but on the logistics of the fund, the wording of the final documents Ms. Adebayo would send. The doorbell rang. I set the knitting aside and went to the door. Through the sidelight, I saw Chloe's blonde hair and the sharp lines of her camel coat. I had not been expecting anyone. I opened the door. "Ellie, I was just in the neighborhood, thought I'd pop in. Hope it's not a bad time." Her smile was wide, her voice bright with a practiced cheer. She held a small bakery box. "Not at all, Chloe. Come in." I stepped back, my own polite smile in place. The performance had begun. She bustled in, a cloud of perfume and purposeful energy. "I brought you some of those lemon tarts you like from that patisserie downtown." She handed me the box. "That's very thoughtful, thank you." I took the box to the kitchen, aware of her eyes scanning the living room as she removed her coat. I returned without offering tea. I would not make this easy. "How have you been?" she asked, settling on the edge of the sofa. "Recovered from the big night." "Quite recovered. It was a lovely evening." I resumed my seat and picked up my knitting. The needles clicked softly, a steady domestic sound. "Good, good." She paused, her eyes darting around the room again, lingering on the bookshelves, the artwork. "You know, being here always makes me think, this is such a big house for one person. It must be a lot to manage." "I manage just fine," I said, not looking up from the blue wool. "Oh, I'm sure you do. You're so capable, it's just the upkeep, the cleaning, all these things." Her gesture encompassed the room, my possessions. "It must feel like a burden sometimes." "I don't find my life burdensome, Chloe." I met her gaze briefly. "I like my things, they have meaning to me." "Of course they do," she said quickly, her laugh a little too high. "I didn't mean I just worry about you, that's all. We all do. Marcus says you seem a bit distant lately." "I've been busy," I said, turning the knitting. "One finds new projects in retirement." "Projects, that's nice. Anything exciting?" She leaned forward, her posture eager, probing. "This and that, keeping the mind active." She nodded, unsatisfied. Her eyes landed on a stack of my old painting canvases I had left leaning against a wall, deciding whether to store them. "You know, you really shouldn't worry about all this clutter. We'll take care of it when the time comes." The needles stilled in my hands for a fraction of a second. Then the clicking resumed. "That's very generous of you, but I have no intention of leaving a mess for anyone to take care of. I am quite organized." She flushed slightly. "I didn't mean a asterisk mess asterisk, Ellie. I just meant we want to help. With decisions. It's a lot for one person to think about. Health, the future, have you seen your doctor recently?" There it was, the direct probe. I looked at her, my expression mild. "I saw Dr. Evans for my annual physical in October. He gave me a clean bill of health. Why do you ask?" "No reason, just, you know, at your age, it's good to stay on top of things. We want you around for a long time." Her smile was strained. "I plan to be," I said, my voice even. "In fact, I've been giving a great deal of thought to the future. My future. I've been putting my affairs in a very clear order." Her eyes sharpened. "Your affairs?" "Legal matters. Financial matters. It's a responsible thing to do at any age, don't you think? To ensure one's wishes are clearly documented." "Oh, well, yes, of course." She shifted on the sofa. "But Ellie, you have Marcus for that. He can handle all of that for you. You shouldn't have to trouble yourself with the details." "It's no trouble. I find the details quite interesting. And it's important to me that things are done correctly, according to asterisk my asterisk wishes." I emphasized the last two words just slightly. A silence fell. The cheerful facade was cracking, revealing the frustration beneath. She had come for information, for reassurance that their timeline was intact, and I was giving her nothing but polite, impenetrable calm. "Well," she said, standing abruptly, "I should probably get going, just wanted to check in." "I appreciate that." I set my knitting down and stood as well. She walked to the door, pulling on her coat. She turned, one last attempt. "We're so looking forward to Christmas Day. It's so important, these family traditions, to have everyone together." "It is," I agreed, opening the door for her. The cold air rushed in. "I'll see you then." She hesitated, as if waiting for something more, an invitation to confide, a sign of weakness. I merely stood, waiting for her to leave. "Okay, bye, Ellie." She stepped out. "Goodbye, Chloe. Drive safely." I closed the door. I listened to the sound of her car starting and pulling away. I walked back to the living room and looked at the knitting, the half-finished scarf. Then I looked at the canvases, the so-called clutter. Each item was a bulwark. She had come to survey the territory, and she had found the borders fortified. I returned to my chair. The encounter had not been stressful. It had been clarifying. Their anxiety was growing. My calm assertion that I was ordering my own affairs had unnerved her. They were used to managing me. The idea that I was managing myself was a complication they had not anticipated. I picked up the knitting needles. The rhythmic clicking filled the quiet room again. I thought about Christmas Day, now only a few days away. It would be another performance. But I was no longer just an actor following their script. I was the playwright, and I had just written a new line into the play. The next act would be on my terms. Christmas Eve arrived under a blanket of gray clouds that promised snow. The house was once again filled with the aromas of preparation, the rich scent of the standing rib roast, the sweetness of candied yams, the sharpness of pine. I moved through the familiar routines, polishing the silver, setting the table with my grandmother's china, arranging the centerpiece of holly and white candles. My hands performed the rituals, but my mind was elsewhere. It was positioned as an observer, waiting behind my eyes. The family began to arrive in the late afternoon. Marcus and Chloe first, their arms laden with brightly wrapped packages. Chloe's kiss on my cheek was quick, her eyes already cataloging the room. Marcus hugged me, his embrace tight but brief. "Everything looks great, Mom," he said, but his attention was on his phone, a text message pulling his gaze away. My granddaughter, Lily, barreled into my legs. "Grandma, we made cookies." She held up a misshapen gingerbread man in a Ziploc bag. "He's wonderful," I said, taking it. "We'll put him right here." I placed it on the sideboard, a monument of childish innocence amidst the formal setting. The rest of the family filtered in Carol, a few cousins, and aunt. The house filled with noise and movement. I circulated with a tray of drinks, the gracious hostess. I watched them. I saw the way Marcus and Chloe exchanged looks near the fireplace, a silent communication of impatience. I saw Marcus glance at the ceiling, as if calculating square footage. Dinner was called. We gathered around the long table, the candlelight flickering across faces, casting shifting shadows. The conversation was a familiar hum of year-end summaries, mild politics, plans for New Year's. I spoke when spoken to, offered more gravy past the rolls. I was playing my part, but the script felt thin, transparent. It was during a lull, as plates were being cleared for dessert, that Marcus cleared his throat. He tapped his wine glass lightly with a spoon, a gesture he'd picked up from some corporate dinner. The conversations died down. "I just want to say," he began, his voice taking on a sonorous, paternal tone that grated, "how wonderful it is to all be together. These traditions, this house, it's the heart of our family." He smiled, a practiced, inclusive smile. "And as we look to the future, it's more important than ever that we think about continuity, about making things easier. For everyone." He paused, looking around the table. His gaze settled on me, warm with condescension. "Mom, you've carried so much for so long. We don't want you to have to worry about a thing. Not the house, not your finances, none of it. We're here. We want to help with the planning. It's time." A supportive murmur went around the table. Carol nodded. Chloe beamed, placing her hand over Marcus's on the tablecloth. I had been standing to collect the serving platter for the roast. I set it down carefully. The porcelain made a soft, definitive click on the wood. All eyes turned to me. The room was very quiet. The only sounds were the crackle of the fireplace and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I looked at my son. I saw the man who had whispered in the pantry. I saw the architect of my presumed decline. I did not raise my voice. I did not frown. I let my hands rest on the back of my chair. "That's very kind of you, Marcus," I said. My voice was clear and carried in the stillness. "But don't worry about me. You shouldn't trouble yourselves." He opened his mouth, ready to insist, to override my modesty as he always had. I continued before he could speak. "My affairs are in perfect order. I've seen to everything myself." The words hung in the air. They were simple, grammatically plain, but their meaning was a seismic shift in the geography of the room. Marcus's smile froze, then slowly dissolved. Confusion clouded his features. "What do you mean, Mom? Seen to what?" Everything, I repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. My will, my power of attorney, my healthcare directive, all of it. It's been handled, recently and thoroughly. There is no need for you to plan anything. Chloe's beaming smile had vanished. Her face was a careful blank, but her eyes were wide, darting between Marcus and me. You've done all that, by yourself. But why wouldn't you include Marcus? He's your son. Because they are my affairs, I said, turning my calm gaze to her. And I am capable of handling them. It seemed the responsible thing to do. A thick, uncomfortable silence pressed down on the table. Carol looked down at her napkin. My aunt blinked, confused by the sudden tension. Lily, sensing the change, whispered, "Daddy." Marcus's face flushed a deep red. It was the flush of embarrassment of a plan derailed. "Who helped you? Did you go to a lawyer? Which one?" "That's my business, dear," I said, my tone still pleasant but final. "The point is, it's done, so you can put your minds at ease. There is nothing for you to take care of." I let the phrase linger, the same one Chloe had used in my living room. I picked up the platter again. "Now, who would like some apple pie? Carol, you made it. It looks delicious." The spell was broken, but the atmosphere was fractured. The festive warmth was gone, replaced by a brittle chill. Conversations resumed, but they were hushed, glancing. Marcus sat stiffly, staring at his wine glass. Chloe pushed her food around her plate, her jaw tight. I served the pie. I passed the whipped cream. I asked my cousin about her new job. I performed the normalcy, but the foundation had cracked. They had expected a gentle, grateful surrender. They had received a calm, preemptive strike. As I drank my coffee, I watched them over the rim of my cup. The confusion on their faces was the first small down payment on their presumption. The main event was still to come, locked in a drawer in Ms. Adebayo's office. But tonight, I had taken back the narrative in front of an audience. I had announced, without fanfare, that the quiet woman in the background was now the author, and the next chapter was already written. The 2 days after Christmas were quiet. The snow that had threatened on Christmas Eve fell softly on Boxing Day, blanketing the world in a muffled white. My house was clean, the last of the guests gone. The silence was no longer charged with anticipation. It was the quiet of a task completed. I had signed the final documents at Ms. Adebayo's office on the morning of the 26th, with Beverly and a paralegal as witnesses. The pen had felt heavy, but my signature was firm. It was done. The new will, the power of attorney nomming Beverly, the healthcare directive, all were executed, notarized, and filed. The mechanism was now irreversible. I spent the 27th at home reading. I did not answer the phone when it rang. I let it go to the machine. Marcus's voice, trying for casual. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Call me back." There was a tension in his tone that had not been there before Christmas Eve. I did not call back. On the morning of the 28th, my own phone rang early. It was Beverly. "The letters went out yesterday," she said without greeting. "Overnight delivery, registered mail. They would have arrived this morning." "Thank you for letting me know," I said. I was standing in my kitchen, looking out at the pristine snow in the backyard. "Are you ready?" she asked. Her voice was steady, a rock in the coming storm. "I am. Call me later. I want to hear everything." I hung up. I made breakfast. I ate it at the table, watching the clock. I imagined the scene at Marcus and Chloe's modern townhouse. The mail arriving. Chloe, perhaps still in her robe, sorting through bills and holiday catalogs. The thick, formal envelope from Adebayo and Associates, attorneys at law. Her confusion. Then her dawning comprehension. My phone rang at 9:47 a.m. It was Marcus. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Good morning, dear." "Mom." His voice was tight, controlled, but the anger vibrated beneath the surface. "What is this? I just got a letter from a law firm, an Adebayo. It says I'm summoned to the reading of your last will and testament on December 30th. What is going on? Is this a joke?" "It is not a joke," I said, my voice calm. "Ms. Adebayo is my attorney. As I mentioned at dinner, I've put my affairs in order. The reading is a formality for the beneficiaries." "A formality? Mom, this is insane. Why wouldn't you talk to me about this? Why some lawyer I've never heard of? And why a reading? People only do that when it's. He couldn't say the word. When it's necessary, I finished for him. It is a standard legal procedure to ensure clarity. I wanted everything to be clear. Clear about what? He demanded, his control slipping. What have you done? I have executed my last will and testament, Marcus. That's all. You'll hear the details on the 30th. The letter has the time and address. A strangled sound came through the phone. I heard Chloe's voice in the background, sharp and panicked. What did she say? What is it? I have to go, Marcus bit out. Of course, I'll see you on the 30th. I ended the call. The phone rang again almost immediately. I did not answer. The machine picked up after 4 rings. Chloe's voice, saccharine and strained. Ellie, honey, it's Chloe. We got this very strange letter. There must be some misunderstanding. Can you please call us? We're worried about you. The message clicked off. I erased it. The day unfolded in a series of escalating communications. A call from a number I didn't recognize, likely Ms. Adebayo's office, as Marcus tried to bypass me. They would have been told, politely and firmly, that all communication should go through the client, who was of sound mind and body. A florist delivery arrived at my door in the afternoon, a massive, expensive bouquet of white lilies. The card read, "Thinking of you. Let's talk. Love, Marcus and Chloe **. It was a bribe, a peace offering wrapped in cellulose. I placed the flowers in the kitchen sink. The final call came just after 5 p.m. It was Marcus again. This time, his anger was raw, unfiltered by shock. I called the lawyer, he said, his voice low and dangerous. She wouldn't tell me a damn thing. Client confidentiality. Who is this woman? What have you told her? Mom, you can't do this. You're not thinking straight. This is our family, our legacy. I am thinking very clearly, I replied. I was sitting in my living room, the blue scarf I had been knitting now finished in my lap. And it is precisely because it is my legacy that I have taken these steps. My legacy, Marcus, not yours, not yet. What does that mean? He shouted. I held the phone slightly away from my ear. Are you cutting me out? Is that what this is? After everything? Because of some paranoid idea? I am not cutting you out, I said, which was technically true. I am distributing my estate according to my wishes. You will learn what those wishes are on the 30th. Goodbye, Marcus. I turned my phone off. I placed it on the side table. The house was utterly silent. The snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes pasting themselves against the window. I felt a profound stillness. The trap had been sprung. The formal, legal summons was the pinprick that had deflated their balloon of assumptions. Their confusion, their panic, their angry calls, these were the sounds of that deflation. I had not raised my voice. I had not engaged in argument. I had merely set a date on a calendar and informed them of it through proper channels. The power of it was in its cold, impersonal formality. They could rage at me, but they could not rage at the law, at the registered letter, at the appointment in a lawyer's office. I picked up the blue scarf and ran its soft length through my fingers. It was complete, a tangible product of my time and intention. In 2 days, there would be another kind of completion. I felt no excitement, only a deep, solid certainty. The path was laid. All that remained was to walk it to its end. December 30th was a day of sharp, clear cold. The sky was a brittle blue. I dressed in the same steel gray suit I had worn to my first meeting with Ms. Adebayo. It felt like a uniform for the task ahead. Beverly picked me up at 10. She was quiet as she drove, but she reached over and squeezed my hand once, a gesture of solid support. We did not speak much. The air in the car was thick with unspoken thoughts. Ms. Adebayo's office suite was quieter than on my previous visit. The reception area was empty. Her assistant led us not to her personal office, but to a small, formal conference room. A long, polished table, leather chairs, a carafe of water and glasses. It was a room designed for serious, impersonal business. Marcus and Chloe were already there. They sat on one side of the table. Marcus wore a dark suit, his face a mask of controlled fury. Chloe was in a tailored dress, her posture rigid, her hands clenched together on the tabletop. They both looked up as Beverly and I entered. Their eyes held a mixture of anger, confusion, and a dawning, terrible fear. They had not expected me to be here, alive and well, attending my own will reading. The sight of me seemed to disorient them further. "Mom," Marcus said, standing. It was an automatic gesture. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning will become clear shortly, Marcus," I said, my voice even. I took a seat on the opposite side of the table, Beverly beside me. I did not look at them again. Ms. Adebio entered then, followed by a paralegal with a notary stamp. The lawyer carried a thin folder. She nodded to each of us, her expression professionally blank. She took her seat at the head of the table. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Alina Marie Vance," she began, her voice cool and clear. "Present are the testator, Mrs. Vance, the primary beneficiaries, Marcus Vance and Chloe Vance, and a witness, Beverly Thompson. This is a formal reading as requested by the testator." She opened the folder. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. I watched Marcus. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Ms. Adebio read the preliminary legal language, the revocations of prior wills. Then she reached the dispositive provisions. Her tone did not change. It was a monotone of authority. Article 3. I direct that my primary residence, located at 2147 Maple Drive, be transferred upon my death to the County Historical Society for preservation and use as a historic property, with the stipulation that it not be substantially altered. A sharp intake of breath from Chloe. Marcus stared at the lawyer, uncomprehending. Article 4. All remaining stocks, bonds, and liquid assets held in my name are to be liquidated. The proceeds, along with the contents of my savings and money market accounts, are to be used to establish an endowed fund, to be named the Alina Vance Legacy Fund, at the Elm Street Community Center. The fund is to be used solely for the support and expansion of adult and child literacy programs. "What?" The word exploded from Marcus. He half rose from his chair. "That's my inheritance. That's our money." Ms. Adebio looked at him over the top of her glasses. "Mr. Vance, you will have an opportunity to receive your copy. Please allow me to continue." He sank back down, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. Chloe had gone very pale. Her eyes were fixed on the lawyer, wide with horror. Article 5. To my son, Marcus Allen Vance, I leave the sum of $50,000. I also bequeath to him the entirety of my personal library, to do with as he sees fit. Marcus made a choked sound. $50,000. A token. A slap. Article 6. To my daughter-in-law, Chloe Elizabeth Vance, I leave my sapphire and diamond Art Deco brooch. Ms. Adebio paused here, and for the first time, her voice held a faint, deliberate emphasis as she read the next clause. "It is my hope that this piece will serve as a reminder that some things of value are earned, not assumed." Chloe recoiled as if struck. A small, gasping noise escaped her. Her hand flew to her throat. "The remainder of my tangible personal property is to be distributed at the discretion of my executor, Beverly Thompson, with the suggestion that items of sentimental value be offered to other family members, and the rest donated to charity." Ms. Adebio finished reading the administrative clauses, appointed Beverly as executor, and closed the folder. The finality of the gesture was like a door slamming shut. The silence in the room was absolute for 3 full seconds. Then chaos. "How could you?" Marcus roared, surging to his feet again. His chair screeched backward. He pointed a shaking finger at me across the table. "How could you do this to me? To us? That is my house, my money, you are my mother." I looked at him. I felt nothing but a cold, clear distance. "I am your mother, and you planned my last Christmas. You measured my life for your convenience. This is the consequence." "It was just talk," he screamed, spittle flying. "We were just thinking ahead, taking care of you." "You were not taking care of me," I said, my voice still calm, cutting through his rage. "You were disposing of me. Now I have disposed of my assets. It is simple." Chloe made a strange, whimpering sound. She was staring straight ahead, her breathing shallow and rapid. "The house," she whispered. "The Historical Society, our plans the architect." Then her eyes rolled back in her head. Her body went limp. She slid from her chair in a rustle of fabric and hit the carpeted floor with a soft, heavy thud. "Chloe," Marcus yelled, crouching beside her. He shook her shoulder. She was out cold. Ms. Adebio remained seated, unruffled. She pressed a button on the phone console. "Medical assistance to the conference room, please." She then looked at Marcus, who was cradling his wife's head. "The reading is concluded, Mr. Vance. Copies of the document will be mailed to you. The will has been admitted to probate. It is valid and binding." I stood. Beverly stood beside me. We looked down at the scene. Marcus on the floor, Chloe unconscious, the lawyer watching with detached professionalism. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said. He didn't look up. He was murmuring to Chloe, trying to revive her. He was in the wreckage of his own expectations. Beverly and I walked out of the conference room, down the hall, past the startled assistant and the arriving security guard. We did not speak until we were in the elevator, descending. "Well," Beverly said finally, letting out a long breath, "that went about as expected." "Yes," I said. I felt empty, cleansed. The vengeance was not sweet. It was just. It was a transaction that had now been settled. The ledger was balanced. The cold stone of hurt I had carried since the pantry was gone. In its place was a vast, quiet space. It was time to fill it with something new. The first day of the new year dawned clear and bright, the sun glaring off the remnants of snow. I woke in my apartment, the smaller, coher space I had moved into after selling the Maple Drive house. The proceeds had already been transferred to the community center fund. The apartment held only my most essential and loved things: my mother's quilts, my books, a few paintings. It was mine, unburdened by history or expectation. I dressed in comfortable clothes, slacks, and a warm sweater. I drove across town to the Elm Street Community Center. The parking lot was already half full. As I pushed through the doors, the wave of sound and warmth hit me. The lobby was decorated with handmade paper snowflakes and banners that read, "Happy New Year," in childlike script. The air smelled of popcorn and construction paper. Sarah Wilkins saw me and waved from across the lobby, where she was wrestling with a folding table. "Ellie, Happy New Year! You're just in time. The cookie decorating is about to descend into beautiful chaos in the multi-purpose room. We could use an extra set of steady hands." "That's why I'm here," I said, hanging my coat on a rack already overflowing with small, puffy jackets. I walked into the large room. Long tables were covered with butcher paper. Bowls of brightly colored icing, sprinkles, and plain sugar cookies were laid out. A dozen children were already clamoring at the door, held back by a laughing volunteer. Beverly was there, wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" and arranging plastic knives. "There she is," Beverly said, spotting me. "The woman of the hour, ready for your first official day of volunteer service." "Ready," I said, taking an apron from a stack. The children were released. They flooded the tables with a joyful noise that was the opposite of the tense silence in Ms. Adebio's conference room. I helped a little girl named Mia, who was concentrating fiercely on making a purple dinosaur cookie. I passed bowls of sprinkles. I wiped up spills. I listened to the chatter, the laughter, the simple, immediate problems of too much green icing. About an hour in, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I excused myself and stepped into the quiet hallway. I pulled it out. A text message from Marcus. "Mom, I need to talk to you about everything. What I said, what we did, I'm sorry. It was wrong. Can we please talk?" I read the words. They did not spark joy or relief. They were just words on a screen arriving weeks too late. The apology was for his benefit, to ease his guilt, not mine. I felt a distant pang, the ghost of the old hurt, but it had no power. My life was in this hallway, with the noise of children behind me. I did not reply immediately. I stood there, holding the phone. I thought about the pantry, the toast, the architect's plans. I thought about the cold fear in Chloe's eyes, the sound of her body hitting the floor. That chapter was closed. The legalities were proceeding. The house was in the hands of the Historical Society. The fund was being established. I typed a short reply. "I received your message." I did not say I accepted the apology. I did not say we would talk. I simply acknowledged its existence. Then I turned off my phone and put it back in my pocket. I returned to the multi-purpose room. Mia held up her dinosaur cookie, now covered in a thick layer of purple icing and multicolored sprinkles. Look, Miss Ellie, he's perfect. He is absolutely perfect, I agreed, my smile coming easily, naturally. I spent the rest of the afternoon there. I helped clean up the sticky mess. I stacked chairs. I talked with Sarah about the schedule for the literacy tutoring program, which I would start next week. I made a note to bring some of my old, gently used books for the center's library. As the winter light began to fade, Beverly and I put on our coats to leave. We stood for a moment on the steps outside, the cold air sharp after the warmth inside. "You're quiet," Beverly observed. "I'm content," I said, and it was the truth. I was not happy in a bubbling, excitable way. I was settled. The turmoil had passed. The revenge was complete, not as a fiery act, but as a cold, just realignment of the world. It had created this space, this peace. "Good," she said, linking her arm through mine as we walked to the cars. "That's all you ever needed to be." I drove back to my apartment. It was quiet, but the quiet was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of children's laughter, the memory of purposeful work, the solid certainty of my own decisions. I made a simple dinner for one and ate it at my small table by the window, watching the streetlights come on. I thought about the year ahead. There would be tutoring sessions to prepare for. There might be legal follow-up from the estate, but Beverly and Ms. Adebio would handle that. There would be no more family Christmases at Maple Drive. That tradition was over by my hand. A new one had already begun, in a room full of icing and sprinkles. Later, as I got ready for bed, I passed the mirror. The woman who looked back had silver hair, keen eyes, and a face that was no longer etched with the strain of keeping peace. She looked her age, but she also looked like herself, perhaps for the first time in decades. Eleanor Vance, retired librarian, volunteer, founder of a legacy fund, a woman who had rewritten her own ending and was now living the new beginning. I turned out the light. The room was dark, but the streetlight outside cast a soft glow. I could hear the faint sound of traffic, the world moving on. I closed my eyes. There was no raging, no plotting, no hurt. There was only the quiet fatigue of a day spent well and the simple anticipation of tomorrow. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was mine.